we do get, as you said, loads of mentions, as I've just read them before there, of like 2 being killed by the warriors of the house. And
what's the score?
Who knows? 2-1, 3-3. That's a couple of scores. Hello everyone and welcome to the Council of Elrond, your weekly podcast on all things Lord of the Rings and Professor Tolkien. On the podcast today we're going to be looking at the Balrog of Morgoth as seen in the Fellowship of the Ring, and not only this Balrog that we know and love, we will be looking at all Balrogs of Morgoth. So we'll look into what kind of being the Balrog is and where he came from. We look at his powers and any other questions and doubts you may have, including some that you probably don't. And as usual, I'm joined by my brother and co-host, Dave. So, hi, Dave. How are you getting on? How's things?
Good. I'm looking forward to talking about Balrogs.
The Balrogs, exactly. So if you are also interested in talking about Balrogs and Balrogs, please get in touch with us on our socials. You can check out our link tree and all our other links in our description box below. That you'll see there our Patreon, our YouTube, our Twitter accounts, etc. And you'll also see a link there for our Buy Me a Coffee. If you'd like to donate us the price of a cup of coffee, you can do so there. So that would be great. Thank you to all of our current sponsors, and a big shout out as well to Jack Knightley. So without further ado, let's get into today's podcast.
A Balrog, a demon of the ancient world. His foe is beyond any Run!
So, welcome everyone. Welcome, Dave. And let's start this podcast by refreshing everyone's memory of who the Balrog is. So, Dave, can you remind our listeners where we meet him in the Fellowship of the Ring movie?
So the Balrog we're referring to would be Durin's Bane, who we meet in the mines of Moria at the bridge of Khazad-dûm, when he comes upon the Fellowship and he attacks them, and Gandalf saves the Fellowship, and then they eventually fly away in the words of Gandalf, and the Balrog brings Gandalf down to his doom, or Gandalf the Grey, that is, anyways.
Right.
And yes.
And vice versa.
And we do get to see him. Is that an extended scene in the second movie, or is that a regular scene where it's...
No. That's the opening scene of the second movie.
Just
the theatrical cut. No, yeah. I remember that from the cinema. I remember the scene. I remember going into the second movie after waiting for a year, and I hadn't read the book, so I didn't know if Gandalf survived or not. I remember the opening scene, flying through the misty mountains, and then just hearing like, "You cannot pass," and I was like, "Oh, flashback," and I was like, "Here we go, we're gonna find something out." And then you see Gandalf falling, and the camera follows him down. I was so cool. Down the chasm. I was like, I knew it. I was like, I knew
here we go.
I was like, here we go. Now we're gonna get to see this side of the camera, see what's going on, see what's happening. So that was very, very good. So yes, that's the scene, and also that scene, that quote from Gandalf of "You cannot pass." Is, well, actually we have "You cannot pass" is from the book, and in the movie we also get the "You shall not pass," which is only a movie, which was written by Philippa Boyens, I believe. Fair play to Philippa. She said, you know what, we could put in a little bit of a "You shall not," because that would just sound even better with Sir Ian McKellen's voice. So
I like the way they do both as well. I like the way
they do both.
He goes, "You cannot pass" at first, and
"Dark fire will not avail you, flame of Udun."
But when he says "You shall not pass," it just sounds much more, I don't know, punctuated. It's like you got a full stop after every single one. It's like, "You shall not pass." You have to hang on to every word.
It was Twitter full caps, like, you know.
It would have been weird if he was like, "You cannot pass."
You can't pass. So anyway, so that's probably the most famous line of dialogue from the entire 3 movies, and that is directed at himself, Durin's Bane, aka the Balrog. So that is who we're talking about, and we're going to get into more about this guy, this creature. So Dave, first of all, I said this creature. What is he? Is he an animal? Is he like a dragon? Is he like
he's a spooky
hippopotamus?
Ghost. He is
spooky ghost.
So he comes from the race of Maiar. Would you call them race? Yeah. So he is one of the Maya. So he'd be on par with the likes of with the likes of Gandalf and Saruman and Sauron himself.
Exactly.
He wouldn't obviously be as strong as Sauron, but he would be. I always just assumed he's a strong-willed. Like we talked about it before in the Sauron episode, like why doesn't Sauron command the Balrogs? And I suppose because they're kind of on equal level with him. But he is a leader of the Balrogs in a way. He is the lieutenant. Talking about Sauron again.
Right, yeah.
But yeah, so this Balrog, even though he's depicted in Peter Jackson's movie as kind of like a monster that doesn't speak or anything, in the books or how Tolkien would describe him, it seems like they would be more of a shadowy, maybe humanoid creature, but definitely very, very intelligent and on a similar power level to the Astari and the likes. So yeah.
Correct. Exactly. And we know that there are two main levels of these kind of angel things. We have the Valar, and then below them we have the Maiar. But that doesn't mean that they're all the same. You could have like really strong Valar and then weaker Valar, and then similar, you could have really strong Maiar. For example, Sauron was a really strong Maia, and then the Balrog would be, again, pretty strong, but like maybe at a lesser level. Similarly, all 5 of the Astari, all 5 of the wizards were all Maiar, and so we know that some of them were more powerful than others. Saruman was clearly more powerful than Radagast, for example. But they all had the same sort of description of race, I suppose. So that's who he was. So then Balrogs, another name for them would be Valaraukar, and that is the Quenya word for them, which means the demons of power. They were Maiar that were seduced and corrupted by Melkor into his service. So remember, again, Melkor, he was the Vala that turned bad, and he was like, I'm leaving here, I'm getting out of here. And he grabbed a load of his lower tier level guys, Maiar, and he was like, any chance you want to come along and join my startup that I'm going for here? And they were like, I'll come along with you. Yeah, sounds like a good deal. Make me vice captain, and I'll be like, yeah, I'll be on your team.
A startup business, yeah. That's what Melkor was doing when he left the corporate.
Yeah, exactly. He was like, screw this, I'm gonna just be my own boss. So you already touched on it there a little bit there, the appearance of the Balrogs. We get to see the appearance of him in the movie. We get to see a very nice visual from there. But in the books, they're described as being that they took the form of a tall, menacing and kind of man shape, and that they also were able to kind of control fire and shadow, and that they would wield a fiery whip as well as kind of a sword sometimes. We also know that Gothmog, do you remember, Dave, Gothmog, the Lord of Balrogs in the first stage? He was the biggest, baddest Balrog. Do you remember a particular weapon that he was supposed to use?
I'm going to say a hammer.
No. An axe. An axe.
Balderdash.
So Gothmog is kind of like the only Balrog who was described as using stuff that other than a flaming whip and a sword.
Yeah.
He had this kind of special axe, which was pretty badass apparently as well. They also kind of induced terror in their victims, kind of like the Nazgul, I suppose. So they'd just be, they would be terrifying and people would get freaked out. So that was another advantage that they had. So they were pretty freaky looking dudes. And in his published works, Tolkien depicts the Balrog as being a shape wreathed in shadow and flame, possibly man shape, as I said, but greater. He also describes the Balrog as being only, quote, several feet taller than an average man. And in the history of Middle-earth, Balrogs are revealed to be twice as tall as an elf. So that's the description that we get in the books. But what do you think, Dave, about the creative license, I suppose, that Peter Jackson went? Would you like his design? Do you think it's cool? Do you think he should have stayed more closely to what Tolkien wrote? What do you reckon? What do you think of his horns?
The horns are cool. Looks very demonic. I think we've both seen the artwork of, that man who's probably twice the size, or like humanoid figure who's about twice the size of the orcs, standing at one end of the bridge of Khazad-dûm, and just like on looking at Gandalf, and it just looks a bit dumb, and I can't imagine it any other way in Peter Jackson's movies. Like, I can't imagine a big man kind of fighting Gandalf. So that's what I grew up with, and that's what I've come to love. And we can see even in the Rings of Power, they obviously copied almost exactly Durin's Bane, the image that they had in Peter Jackson's movie. So I don't even know how they got the rights to that, but they did, and that's because it's so iconic. Like, no, it would be weird if you just saw something more similar to like a troll, just covered in shadow and flame, and the whole argument with the wings. I don't know if we're going to get into it here, but yeah, I think like it's cool. It just looks cool. Like it's a cool looking creature, and okay, it's not 100% accurate to the books, but who cares? Like, there's so many inaccuracies in lots of things, so I'll take it.
Sure, there's even inaccuracies in what Tolkien said himself, so we'll get into that later on. But yeah, anybody who listens to this podcast regularly will know that Dave and I grew up on the Peter Jackson movies before we actually got into the writings of the book, so it's very easy to. I would never look on the image of Peter Jackson's Balrog and say, no, it's crap, I hate it, because that was our gateway into Tolkien. That was the way we found out about him. So that was how we first kind of pictured it. And it's very difficult to kind of go against what you first pictured as well. So that's when I go back and see some images now from, that were drawn by famous artists back in like the 80s or something like that. I'll see some that I'm like, they look kind of crap. And other ones like, well, again, there's the ones that are quite to the point on what Tolkien wrote, that are drawn, and some of them are really cool as well. And speaking about the whole do Balrogs have wings thing, we will get into that later on. But there's also I've seen images drawn by both Ted Naismith and John Howe. Anybody who doesn't know, those are the two guys at the forefront of Tolkien art, and basically they're the guys who did lots of the work for the films. John Howe did some for the Rings of Power, of like the sketches behind the designs. And I've seen one of those. I think I've seen Ted Naismith do one of Balrog being more kind of like a humanoid, no wings, tall, maybe a tail.
But still, also, I'm pretty sure he had horns in his, and kind of demonic looking, fiery eyes.
Horns, kind of fiery, kind of, hairy kind of a creature as well. So humanoid meaning arms and legs, but not really, didn't look human, didn't have like human skin or anything. And then on the other side, I've seen John Howe draw images of them quite similar to the ones that we end up getting in the Peter Jackson movies. But anyway, I agree with you. I think that I really love the design. I think that if they've completely redesigned it for the Rings of Power series and gave us a totally different shape, different style, I think I could also really enjoy that as well.
Would have been interesting,
Yeah, it would have been interesting to get something different. They went the same route as Peter Jackson's, and I can't say I was disappointed with that either. I think it's kind of cool. But anyway, moving on. When do we first hear of Balrogs in Middle-earth, Dave? Can you think of any other mentions before we get to Durin's Bane? Where do we hear about any other Balrogs? I've mentioned one already, but let me know of any other moments when they appeared.
Films or
no. In Lord of the Rings, in Tolkien's writing, when do we hear of any other mentions of Balrogs appearing?
Loads of times. Are we talking Silmarillion? I mean, it's the Dagger Bragalach. There was dragons and Balrogs and Balrogs on top of dragons and dragons on top of Balrogs, and it was just
sure were.
It was a huge fiery orgy of creatures coming to attack. So actually,
that's one of the more famous battles. Yeah, the Dagger Bragalach. There were that was also, Glaurung was there, and there was like armies of orcs coming along, and there were Balrogs as well. So,
this is one of the arguments as well for giving weight to the fact that Balrogs didn't have wings, because they actually travelled on dragon back to the battle.
Not at that battle.
Not at that battle. Okay, well, in some battle, but yeah,
in the Fall of Gondolin. Yeah.
The Fall of Gondolin, obviously there is one mention of just one Balrog, I think, at that battle, and he ends up fighting, I can't remember who it is, on top of a cliff, and then Glorfindel comes along, and it's Glorfindel, and Glorfindel is killed by the Balrog before he gets to come back for a second coming. But Glorfindel and the Balrog battle each other to death. The two of them die at the same time, falling off the cliff. Yeah, so that was nice.
Gandalf stole that idea off Glorfindel. He was like, "I'm going to kill this Balrog, but I'm also going to die." The only way you can kill my friend Glorfindel.
Yeah, it's the only way to kill a Balrog is by falling to both of your deaths. Apparently,
exactly. That's pretty much it. Like, it happens quite a few times. So just to go back on that point, yes, you are right. That was in the year 510 of the first stage. That is during the fall of Gondolin, the big elven stronghold and city. the Balrogs. Now there wasn't just one that you said. There were actually a few that they rode on the backs of dragons to reach the hidden city. So they kind of terrifying as well. Just these dragons are arriving with Balrogs on their backs, and the Lord of the House of the Fountain, Ecthelion, managed to kill Gothmog.
That's what I was trying to... I couldn't remember his name.
And he killed him, and Gothmog killed Ecthelion at the same time. So they just cancel each other out. So that's
double
one
knockout.
lad killing a Balrog and dying himself. And then also, Glorfindel was trying to help some people escape, and he was like bringing this group of people along, and suddenly a Balrog like was sneaking up behind them, and Glorfindel said, Go on without me, I'll stay here. And he kind of was like, I'll take care of this lad. And then they fought together, and yes, they both died as well. And again, they died by falling from a cliff. I think maybe, I'm not sure if it was they fell and they died. I think they fell into
death.
Something. I can't remember. Something.
Death side.
Fall.
We're
Death
also
side.
forgetting one very, very important time when there was a Balrog, and that was when there was an unnamed elf, and there was the song of the roots of the Hithaiglir, and the Balrog, and the tree, and the mithril, and blah, blah, blah.
Totally correct, according to the lore. Exactly, yeah. So, no, there are other ones that I'm going to mention now. So there was that one that was in the Fall of Gondolin. Well, the very first one, I suppose, would be in the Year of the Trees. Now, again, lots of people had their different things that they... their views that they had on in terms of the Rings of Power series. If you liked it, great. If you didn't like it, that's fine too. But one definitely good thing that I think came out of watching this series is that now lots of people have a better understanding of at least the beginnings of Tolkien's world, and then the light of the two trees of Valinor, what happened then, and then the years of the trees is just this huge period of time that was given to when people lived in the light of these trees. So during that time, in the Year of the Trees, we also saw in the Rings of Power that Morgoth came along and he kind of stole the light from the trees and he kind of just destroyed them. And that happened, but he didn't do it alone. He did it with his trusty friend, who, Dave?
Sauron? Oh, sorry. We're talking about the... sorry. I zoned out completely there. Ungoliant.
Yeah, you looked like you weren't paying attention. Yeah.
I was just like thinking about something else.
Think about dinner. Right. Yes. So he did it with the help of his companion Ungoliant, who was a giant spider, Shelo's mom. And they went and they basically destroyed the two trees, and they stole the Silmarils, and then they were running away and they were trying to get away. Then they ended up having a big disagreement because Ungoliant was so hungry that she demanded all the jewels that Melkor had stolen. And he gave her all the jewels except for the 3 Silmarils, and she ate all them jewels. And then she was like, give me those delicious looking Silmarils, I'm going to eat them as well. And he was like, no, stay away. And basically they had this big fight, and Melkor was already like knackered. He'd been fighting for ages. He was really weakened. And so she was getting the better of him. And he let out this huge cry, and he kind of just basically went like, Balrogs, assemble! And the Balrogs were like miles away. Like they were a good 5,000 leagues. I've just made that up. But they were like literally half the map away, if you look at it that way. And then they came really quickly over and they helped Melkor. And they basically all had their fiery whips, and they all like whipped Ungoliant, and like they had like there's those images as well that you can see.
That she liked it.
She loved it. There's loads of images you can see of all of them, like, whipping, but not just like a whoosh kind of thing, but like,
holding on,
like tying her with their whips, kind of like a Doctor Strange sort of attack.
Yeah. In attacking Thanos.
Infinity War.
Yeah, Infinity War. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, when there's like loads of him and they all have like this kind of rope whip thing grabbing him. That was kind of just images like that of the Balrogs. And so yeah, that's probably one of the first mentions. So they were servants of Morgoth, of Melkor. So like whenever he just called for them, they just like swoop in and help him out. So there was that mention. That's one of the first ones. Then there was also during the first stage, the Noldor, who were the elves, like Galadriel, for example, and Feanor, who was one of the most important ones. He was, after this battle, Feanor was like really angry, and he was like, I'm going on alone, and he's kind of pushing on forward. He's trying to like chase down Melkor because he's mad looking for these Silmarils, and he kind of goes off on his own to Angband, and then suddenly he gets ambushed by a force of Balrogs, and he basically was on his own, and he just fought all these Balrogs on his own, and he was like basically the mightiest elf that there ever was. And then people come along and they just say that it looked like he was kind of like wrapped in fire, and basically he ended up dying from his wounds later on. And from Gothmog, again, the Lord of the Balrogs, he was the one who ended up kind of giving him the fatal blow. But he kind of stood there on his own fighting them for ages, and he kind of, he gave a good showing for the elves against a big gang of Balrogs, so that was pretty cool as well. And anything else? There's a few other mentions, I'm not going to go into them now, but basically, yeah, Balrogs, pretty badass around then. And then after the fall of Gondolin, after the War of Wrath, which was at the end of the First Age, there was a big, huge battle. That's when like all the big dragons, the big giant dragons came in. There were Balrogs there were dragons, there was all sorts of things going on. And that's when there was like, basically half the world was broken and all this kind of stuff. And that's also where most of these dragons and Balrogs were all wiped out. And then they weren't seen for another 5,000 years. So they kind of missed all the Second Age. And we don't hear about Balrogs again until the middle of the Third Age, which is like 1980 in the Third Age. We get the Balrog waking up in Moria.
Yeah,
so
we just know of one, like, he's the only one.
Yeah.
But like, there's probably lots
yeah.
that went away and went to sleep. And I do think it's...
We'll see.
Okay, yeah, right. Well, I do think it is cool how the Balrog is depicted as this big, scary demon creature thing in The Lord of the Rings, and obviously the movies as well, but it's like this big, bad, scary guy, and then when you go and read the Silmarillion, it's like, there was loads of them. Balrogs crawling out of the mines all over the place, like
out of the woodwork.
There were so many of them. They were just another thing.
Yeah, they were falling out the gaff. So that is a kind of a brief history of where we first get to see the Balrogs, but we're going to look at this particular Balrog now that wakes up in Moria. We're going to look at him for a few moments. And first of all, Dave, you already mentioned, but what's the name of this charming fellow that we get to know?
Well, he is called Durin's Bane because he is the Bane of Durin.
He's the Bane. He's like your man from Batman, Bane. And what's his deal like? What's his backstory?
Who, Durin's Bane?
Durin's Bane, yeah.
Sure, you're going to tell me, but he crawled into the mines of Moria after the War of Wrath and basically wiped out everyone in there, and then went to sleep for a very long nap. And then at some point in the during the Second Age, a tiny little leaf trickled all the way down and woke him up, and then he got very angry.
Well, no, that's the Third Age.
Sorry, I was thinking of the Second Age of the show. But like in the show, a tiny little leaf trickles down, he wakes up for a second, then probably goes back to sleep, hopefully. And then in the Third Age, he wakes up and actually, when the Fellowship come down there in the year 3018. No, yeah.
Very good. Okay, yes, lovely description. And yeah, so basically, now you said that when he went into Moria, he wiped everybody out. It's not exactly correct. He fled there and he just crept into this hole underground and went to sleep for like 5,000 years. And then 5,000 years later, that's when people were like, woke him up and he destroyed everyone. And
I thought he wiped everyone out twice, but no, he just snuck in the back door and was like, I'm just gonna go for a little snooze here. And then just
he could have wiped
5,000 years
but sure, we don't. But like, as in, remember, he wasn't actually in Moria. He wasn't actually in Khazad-dûm when he got awoken. He was underneath it.
That's true.
He
dug
he was
to
in
him.
some cracks of the earth. Yeah, they dug down to him. Exactly. Yeah,
that is
he
true.
Was first. He was
there first.
Yeah. So yeah, exactly. And then eventually he gets woken up. He kills. Which Durin does he kill?
Durin the Sixth.
Correct.
All right.
A nice pronunciation of sixth.
Yeah.
Exactly. Well done. He kills Durin the Sixth, and he also kills that. So he kills Durin the Sixth. Then his son takes over as the king in Khazad-dûm, and he's in there for like a year, and then he gets killed as well. No, Durin's son. And then the Balrog kills him as well.
Oh,
and
right.
then about a year later, they're like, right, we should have left here a year ago. And then they're like, okay, time to go. So they pack their things, then they leave, and they get out. And yeah.
Wait, Durin the Seventh is killed by the Balrog too?
No, his son isn't Durin the Seventh.
Sorry.
Some randomer.
Sorry, the TV show is messing my brain. Right,
exactly.
so his son was killed too. Oh, that's such a bummer.
So that's Durin's Bane anyway, and that's how he first started out in the mines of Moria. They, of course, as we just said, they dug down, they woke him up, and then he kind of destroyed everyone. They all left, and he wasn't seen again. He went back to sleep again, I suppose, until our crew, our fellowship, were wandering through, and they were very noisy, and Pippin was dropping skeletons and buckets down holes and stuff and making loads of noise and disturbing him, really, being kind of annoying. So I'm actually going to read you a little bit now from my book here, from the chapter The Bridge of Khazad-dûm from the Fellowship of the Ring. And I want to look at the part where the company actually meets the Balrog for the first time, bumps into him and says, how are you getting on? And I want to see how... Well, we're going to look at how they actually, they don't really know what's going on for a while. They don't know that it's a Balrog. They eventually find out what it is. But first of all, they're kind of like, who is this guy and why is he so powerful and what's happening? So we're going to start here from a part where basically the Balrog has just shown up, but he's on the opposite side of this door, and they've kind of like closed the door. Gandalf's closing the door, and they can hear the orcs on the opposite side of the door. So it says here, Gandalf came flying down the steps and fell to the ground in the midst of the company. Well, that's over, said the wizard, struggling to his feet. I have done all that I could, but I have met my match and have nearly been destroyed. But don't stand here. Go on. You will have to do without light for a while. I'm rather shaken. So what happened there was that Gandalf had stayed behind the company and he had been kind of holding the door, and then they all ran off and he was like, yeah, I'll hold this door here because there's all the orcs coming up behind. And then he tried to contest with this thing. So then later on he explains a bit more about what happened. So they go off, and I think it says that they walk around for about an hour, and then after an hour Gandalf is talking about trying to find the next turn, and he says, I'll read on. I hope it is not far. I am very weary. I must rest here a moment, even if all the orcs ever spawned are after us. Gimli took his arm and helped him down to a seat on the step. What happened away up there at the door? He asked. Did you meet the beater of the drums? I do not know, answered Gandalf, but I found myself suddenly faced by something I have not met before. I could think of nothing to do but try and put a shutting spell on the door. I know many, but to do things of that kind rightly requires time, and even then the doors can be broken by strength. As I stood there, I could hear orc voices on the other side. At any moment I thought they would burst it open. I could not hear what was said. They seemed to be talking in their own hideous language. All I caught was gash, that is, fire. Then something came into the chamber. I felt it through the door, and the orcs themselves were afraid and fell silent. It laid hold of the iron ring, and then it perceived me and my spell. What it was, I cannot guess, but I have never felt such a challenge. The counterspell was terrible. It nearly broke me. For an instant, the door left my control and began to open. I had to speak a word of command. That proved too great a strain. The door burst in pieces. Something dark as a cloud was blocking out all the light inside, and I was thrown backwards down the stairs. All the wall gave way, and the roof of the chamber as well, I think. I have never felt so spent, but it is passing.
Wow.
So
there you go. So Gandalf, like, first of all, differences between the film and the book here. Gandalf doesn't know what the creature is, whereas in the film, he's like, a Balrog of Morgoth.
Well, it's kind of like they just sort of skip that part in the movie, and then the part that we see later, we do get to see in a couple of pages, which I'm going to read as well in a few moments. Yeah. But that part I think is really cool because he's there kind of on opposite sides of a door, and it's kind of, this is probably the most high magic that we get to see in pretty much all of Lord of the Rings, where Gandalf is casting shutting spells on a door, and the Balrog is challenging with his own shuttings or with his own spells, and like it says here that the counter spell almost broke him or something, and he says the counter spell was terrible, it nearly broke me. And we see these parts where Gandalf is like, I've never had such a challenge in my life. So again, as we saw in Peter Jackson's one, and you mentioned it before, he kind of just seems like this big dumb kind of monster that's just hugely powerful and strong, but he's also really a really intelligent being. He knows magic, he knows spells, he can do counter spells.
Yeah, he just seems like the same level as Gandalf, and this is like he doesn't know what's on the other side of the door, but it's equally as powerful as him. It nearly broke him. He's had to do spells. This other thing is doing counter spells. So it just sounds like there's another Gandalf on the other side of the door.
Sure.
So which makes sense. It's a Maya. And in the words of Gandalf, I have grown quite weary.
Also, remember that Gandalf is a Maya, but when he became an Istar, which is one of the wizards, he kind of sort of signed a contract to say, like, yeah, I'm not going to use my powers and I'm going to like reduce my power levels. So we don't really know too much about the level of this Maya, which is the Balrog. So this weakened Gandalf Maya could be like weaker than the Balrog, but like, obviously Gandalf ended up defeating him. So,
maybe, yeah.
We'll see. But
yeah, but I just assumed that like the spirits of the Maya, like all up in Valinor or all up in heaven or doing whatever, they're all like super, super powerful and supercharged. And then like, the Istar or the Istari like came into their forms of old men and like they were kind of sucked into that form and they weren't able to produce much high magic. And I kind of feel the same way with the Balrogs. They're just Maya spirits that took the form of like these big demon things, and like they are constrained to their powers. So like Gandalf can still use magic, the Balrogs can still use magic, but nothing compared to what both of those beings would have been able to do up in the stairs.
Yeah, well, you never know. Possibly.
But like obviously Gandalf or the Balrog has like fiery powers, and I suppose Gandalf kind of has fiery powers too, but they kind of have their own special like sect of powers that they're able to use when they're down on planet Middle Earth,
Yeah, right. Exactly. Now, before we go any further, I think it's probably also a good idea to remind our listeners that Tolkien's concepts and his creations were constantly being updated and tweaked over many years. And for this reason, there are some conflicting ideas around many issues, some that we've already spoken about on this podcast, such as the origins of orcs. And there's actually a dedicated website with all the inconsistencies laid out. And that's pretty interesting. You can go there and you can just look up all the different areas where he changed his mind on things or where there was different things being said.
Do you happen to know the name of that website?
I think it might just be a subpage of the Tolkien Gateway. But if you just Google...
they might have changed the name of the website.
Yeah, exactly. It wasn't very consistent. So if you just Google like Tolkien inconsistencies, it'll probably be... I think that's what I Googled, and you'll find...
Right.
It's one of the first matches there. But... So what I wanted to look at was another instance in earlier writings of Tolkien when he initially states that there were many Balrogs, perhaps thousands. So as we already mentioned in some of the earlier battles in the first stage in the Silmarillion, there were just Balrogs showing up all over the gaff. And it was like, oh, this one elf took out 3 Balrogs, and then some of the ones that just arrived on their Uber dragon and all this kind of stuff. So initially the Balrogs were often described as being immense in numbers. So if I look at the Book of Lost Tales, part 2, we'll see some commentary here by Christopher Tolkien, talking about the fall of Gondolin. And here Christopher says, the early conception of Balrogs makes them less terrible and certainly more destructible than they afterwards became. They existed in hundreds and were slain by Tuor and the Gondolin in large numbers. Quote, thus 5 fell before Tuor's great axe Dramborleg, 3 before Ecthelion's sword, and 2 score were slain by the warriors of the king's house. So immediately there, we're getting 2 score slain by someone, then 5 by Tuor and 3 by Ecthelion. So there's loads just been wiped out there. And then in later writings, Christopher Tolkien notes that, quote, in the margin my father wrote, there should not be supposed more than, say, 3 or at most 7 ever existed. And that was from Morgoth's Ring. So later on, he's changed his mind and he's thought, actually, you know what? There's minimum 3, maximum 7 Balrogs that have ever existed. So that's a pretty big change to go back on compared to his first one. I think it kind of makes them more, when they're more rare, then you can imagine that maybe their powers, maybe Tolkien was starting to imagine that their power was even greater when there was fewer of them. If there was loads of them, you couldn't have an army of Balrogs and have them all be just these incredibly insane Gandalf level powered beings, because they'd just easily wipe out all elves and all of Middle Earth. And back in earlier writings, it would have just been way too easy for them to defeat things. So I think the earlier writings, there were loads of Balrogs and they're probably less powerful. But then later on in his updated ideas, there were fewer Balrogs, max 7, and they were all much more powerful than at that point. Do you get me?
Yeah, but I get you. But like the published material, I don't know, it wasn't J.R.R. Tolkien that published the Silmarillion, but that definitely mentions like many Balrogs, or it gives the impression that there was lots of Balrogs in these battles.
Oh yeah.
So yeah, so
But that's
it's a contradiction, but that's not like it's like a lesser canon to me, because the actual published material is largely talking about a lot of Balrogs. So
sure.
okay, what do you think about it?
Okay, so you're saying that the lesser canon would be the
just a
fact that there's
nice
only
note.
3 or 7, or between 3 and 7.
Like, I would have thought that, when I first watched the movie, I would have thought that this was the only one, or maybe there was only a couple of them. And then when I found out that they were Maiar level, or they were like the same as Gandalf, then I was like, oh right, maybe there's only a couple of them. But then when you actually read the Silmarillion, you're like, all right, okay, my views have changed again. But I'm not gonna change this view back to
Not for you,
like,
totally.
oh no, there was only 3 or 7.
I don't know.
Mine's been too messed up.
I think it is the most updated thing. So I think that's what we probably should kind of take to be the gospel.
But like, it's kind of like making them similar to the Astari, but then why would Tolkien talk about them in the battles by saying, oh, and there were Balrogs and there were dragons? Like, if there were that few Balrogs in any existence, they would all have names. They'd all be known. I know there was Gothmog, Durin's Bane, that's not really a name, but you know what I mean? They would have all been very individualized. Like, we've got names of all the Astari.
They were very shy, though. They didn't introduce themselves very much.
Yeah, 7 though. That's too few.
Well, there you go. Anyway, that's all I can tell you. That's the most updated thing. But as you said, in the published material that we have, in the printed word of Professor Tolkien, which was Gospel. Edited by his son Christopher Tolkien, the Silmarillion was edited by Christopher Tolkien. We do get, as you said, loads of mentions, as I've just read them before there, of like 2 score being killed by the warriors of the house. And
what's a score?
Who knows? 2-1, 3-3. That's a couple of scores. Is a score? No, a score is 10. Like 2 score would be 20.
I was thinking that, right? Okay.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's what it is. So anyway, let's move on. And so powers. I want to look at the powers now of the Balrogs.
Right.
And as we just spoke about there, we know that the initial idea was that there were thousands of Balrogs, and at this time in their development, Tolkien thought that they were mighty warriors, evil beings, kind of like tall men, but probably no bigger than that, like than the mountain from Game of Thrones, for example. And they were definitely beatable by both men and elves, as we see in the Silmarillion, as the quotes that I've just given there with both Tuor and Ecthelion and people like that. So we get to, but then when we get to Tolkien's Fellowship of the Ring version of the Balrog, I think we're talking about a wholly different kettle of fish. That this is like one of few extremely powerful and magical angel tier beings. And we see this when Gandalf shouts to the Fellowship that this is, quote, a foe beyond any of you. And here, when he says any of you, like, who's he talking about? He's talking to, Aragorn, who is, one of the most skilled warriors in the land, the heir of Elendil himself. He's the greatest warrior ever. Where he's talking to Boromir, also one of the highest level warriors on the planet, an elf prince, dwarves, etc. So this
hobbits.
The hobbits, yeah, exactly. They're the highest level hobbits around. But I mean, this group, this fellowship is like, shouldn't be underrated. They're like all, at the peak of their trade, except for the hobbits. They were kind of, lagging behind. But they're probably the best smokers of pipeweed or something. But he's saying this foe is beyond any of you. And so in the first stage, even men like, as I said, Tuor, who's a man, he killed like 5 of them with an axe. He just wiped them out. So it's definitely, I think their power levels have changed. So how powerful is this Balrog is the question.
This particular Balrog?
Yeah.
Or just, since Gandalf is talking him up, and like you just said, it seems like their power level is different from the first age Balrogs. Perhaps he needed to hibernate and sleep and like recharge, and that's what made him so. And maybe it's the same as dragons in Middle Earth. They say dragons, they never stop growing. They just they just grow and grow all the time. Or is that Game of Thrones? No, that might be Game of Thrones. But like, you know what I mean? Like, maybe it's because this Balrog is possibly the oldest Balrog ever. He's grown so huge and so powerful, and
it's a good point.
He's just woken up. And, in
he's
the morning
cranky.
time, that's when you're most productive and you're most cranky. And, we can see in the film, he has his Johnny from Fantastic Four. He's got the Human Torch ability where he goes flame on, and he's
Flame
able
on.
to just like kind of burst into more flame. Than it's kind of like taunting Gandalf in that.
Yeah,
so
you can kind of
I
like
feel like that's like a recharge.
yeah, he kind of like pushes out his chest and just like lets the flames go. And he's
Such a cool bit of
unbelievable.
like film right there, but also I feel like this guy would be a lot more powerful than the first guys in the
Sure,
first
and like I mean, just one Balrog entering Khazad-dûm, like the most powerful dwarven realm, and he just wipes out the entire city.
Yeah, that's right.
And it's not just a city; like it's a realm,
Kingdom,
like, it's a
like.
kingdom. It's
Yeah.
greater than anything else. Like we get to see Erebor in the Hobbit movies. This is like way more impressive than Erebor or anything like that. So
And bigger,
huge,
10 times bigger.
way bigger.
Like Erebor is one single mountain, whereas
the
this
Lonely
is under,
Mountain. Yeah.
the Lonely Mountain. This is under a whole heap of mountains.
Exactly. And after the Balrog shows up, they have to change the name. They're like, okay, it used to be called Khazad-dûm. Now it's called Moria, the Black Pit. So, big deal. And so, we know that this guy is hugely powerful, and he's obviously very, very scary. He uses lots of smoke and fire, and he can terrify his foes. But obviously, as we said as well, it's not just some big stupid monster. That he's actually a Maya spirit. And similar to Gandalf, he knows similar magic. He's as intelligent and he's cunning. And as I said in the quote there before, his counter spell to Gandalf almost broke Gandalf, which was his quote. So we're going to look at some more of his abilities, and we can see that the Balrogs were the most trusted and the oldest servants of Morgoth. And with dragons, they were the most powerful creatures under Morgoth's command, and possibly one of the most powerful entities in all of Middle-earth. And in Tolkien's later writings, he made note of the fact that there could have never been more than 7 Balrogs, yet they were able to drive away Ungoliant in what was described as a tempest of fire. This is all the more impressive considering that even Tulkas was helpless before the unlight that Ungoliant spewed to cover her escape. So Tulkas was one of the most powerful. He was originally actually a Maya, but he got upgraded to a Vala because his power was just beyond anything that anybody had seen. So he couldn't handle this at all. So that's a Vala wasn't able to contend with the unlight of Ungoliant, and the Balrogs were able to keep her in check. So the Balrog's most renowned and feared magic involves the creation or summoning of fiery weapons such as swords or whips. And in addition, these guys could also ignite and engulf themselves in flames. It seems likely that they cannot be hurt by normal weapons, as Gandalf said. So Gandalf could fight against the demon because Gandalf himself is also a Maya at the same level. And the blade that Gandalf was using was a sword of Gondolin, Glamdring. And Balrogs possess superhuman strength. So like if you're just Legolas shooting an arrow at him, it's just going to bounce off his arrows. He's like, yeah, it's fine. So they also have incredible strength, durability, stamina, pain tolerance, and they were capable of just picking up a human and just swinging them around and throwing them. So toss them around like
Hulk style.
Yeah, basically like Hulk smash. Pretty much a spot on description there of a Balrog. Yeah. So I don't know if they wore purple pants that they would burst and like have to go down, and every time they
would
try
just burn right off them.
Yeah.
Every time.
God damn it. I need to find some flame-proof pants.
Yeah.
So we are going to move on now to the famous question of whether or not Balrogs had wings. So first of all, Dave, why, if people don't know, why is this an important question? What's the big deal about it? Why is there so much debate online and between Tolkien fans?
Yeah, well, I'm sure there was plenty of debate before the films came out, but when the film came out, Peter Jackson took his own view of what the Balrogs were described as, and he gave them wings. I think actually you and I heard John Howe in person talking about this at the Rings of Power premiere, how like he was heavily involved in the designing of the Balrog with Peter Jackson. So it wasn't just like, oh, idiot Peter, like it was all his fault. But anyways, I'm sure you're going to read the passage, but I know that there is a very ambiguous description of the Balrogs where it says something about their shadow is like winged around them, or it kind of uses the word wings
It
as almost
does.
like as a description, but it's not like to say that they have wings, because Tolkien does this all the time. He could say, you know, like Gandalf would say, "Fly, you fools!" Like he's not saying actually fly. It's just the language he used to say run away. And
Yeah.
this language might have been talking about how the shadow surrounded the Balrog, but I don't know. I've read that passage a few times, and sometimes I'm like, yes, I do think that they don't have wings, but then other times I'm like, yeah, maybe Peter Jackson got it right. It's hard to know.
It is hard to know. It is hard to know. And I've read I've read the Fellowship of the Ring book so many times, and sometimes I'm like, that makes me feel like they do, and sometimes I'm like, that makes me feel like they don't. But researching this podcast, I've kind of been looking up different things and looking into different. It's like there isn't that much source material to actually be able to decide definitively either way. Like you can probably make a good guess, and like I mean, if I had to choose now after the research I've done, I'd probably say that I don't think they had wings, and if they did, they definitely weren't functional wings. They're probably just like just there to look nice.
But Durin's Bane in the film, his wings don't seem to be functional. Like he falls down, it just kind of looks like he almost is like the skeleton of a winged creature, and that's what remains. Like, you know, his horn, like he might have looked completely different, but like when he stretches out his wings, it's just like the bones, and there's no actual like thing that could help him fly. Like he falls down the
also, I think when they fell down that
shaft.
little like cavern, that little chasm, it just seems like at some points there wasn't enough space. Like there wasn't enough space to actually
true.
open up and have like the full wingspan. So in that shot, I remember being younger and I was like, why I watch those movies? I never for one moment thought, why didn't he fly?
Why doesn't he fly?
Because it just looked like it's such a small space, and his wingspan would have been so huge. It was like, well, he didn't have space to open up his wings, and he just, and then he was tumbling and he was all out of sorts. But we kind of like, they don't really behave like they had wings either, because as we said, we've seen a few times that they died from falling. We never hear about these kind of like surprise attacks by Gothmog or we never hear like we're going to see a little bit later that like Durin's Bane, it's not just like the battle that we see in the movie with Gandalf. He doesn't just fall down and kills him straight away. That battle went on for 10 days and they end up like falling to like the lowest point in the abyss. Gandalf ends up like following him for a few days to try and find his way out. And he basically is...
They go to like the highest peak.
They go to the highest peak, exactly. This peak, which is called Zirak Zigil. And that's and then they fight there for like 3 days, I think, non-stop fighting there on top of that peak. And at no point, and it's like Gandalf is kind of like pursuing the Balrog. He's kind of chasing him down again. Super badass move from Gandalf. But there's no point where the Balrog is just like, I'm on the top of a mountain and this guy is trying to kill me. I'm just going to fly away. So, I mean, if he had wings that were functional, he probably could have done that.
How I would counter that is, they went to the lowest depths of Khazad-dûm, and then they went to the highest peak. Like, how did they get there so quickly? Like, it would take probably more than 10 days just to hike it. So, maybe at one point Gandalf was on top of the Balrog and he's like, right, I'm just going to fly up to the peak here. And then,
I don't know. I don't think it would take more than 10 days to hike to the highest peak. Sure, you could do Everest in a couple of days.
Fighting. Yeah.
Anyway, but fighting, not non-stop fighting. There's some times where the Balrog was running and
we'll take a break and we'll hike.
No, but like there were times that the Balrog was trying to run away from Gandalf, and Gandalf was pursuing him and chased him, and also Gandalf was saying he actually followed him because the Balrog knew the way out, and Gandalf didn't know the way out. He was like, the only way my only escape, my only hope was to follow the Balrog to get out of these pits.
God, that's
and
great.
He also mentioned that the Balrog seemed to know his way around there like really, really well, like knew it like the back of his hand. It's like, well, he did spend 5,000 years hanging around there, I suppose, so fair enough. But
sleep.
Yeah, he was sleeping for most of it. Anyway, I'm going to get into the actual main confusing points now, which are the quotes. So first of all, I'm going to read 2 quotes which are maybe less controversial, but first one is from Morgoth's Ring, which is, quote, "Swiftly they arose, and they passed with winged speed over Hithlum, and they came to Lamoth as a tempest of fire." This is after I told you that Morgoth calls for the Balrogs, and it says they arose and they passed with, quote, winged speed. And again, I mean, that's
just describing how quick they got there. As
exactly.
if they flew.
Exactly. It's they got there as so you could be like, oh look, winged speed. They definitely had wings. You could say that about anything, like as in, oh, he got there as if he's on wings, like as the pigeon flies or whatever, He got there really really quickly. Then there's another quote here, which is from the appendix of the Lord of the Rings, which is quote, "Thus they roused from sleep a thing of terror that, flying from Thangorodrim, had lain hidden at the foundations of the earth since the coming of the host of the west, a Balrog of Morgoth." So they're speaking about like they had roused this hidden this terror, and it says flying from Thangorodrim, and it uses the term flying. But again, like I would say to that Gandalf uses the word fly all the time, and not just Gandalf, but Tolkien uses it in his writing, saying we must fly, which means we must go quickly. So they're not really the two strongest points. However, if I read now from the little passage where we properly get to see the Balrog, and it's actually we read a moment ago where they didn't know yet it was a Balrog, and now we're going to read this part. So, reading from the same chapter, Bridge of Khazad-dûm, quote, "What it was could not be seen. It was like a great shadow, in the middle of which was a dark form of a man's shape, maybe, yet greater, and a power and terror seemed to be in it and to go before it. It came to the edge of the fire, and the light faded, as if a cloud had bent over it. Then, with a rush, it leaped across the fissure. The flames roared up to greet it, and wreathed about it, and a black smoke swirled in the air. Its streaming mane kindled and blazed behind it. In its right hand was a blade, like a stabbing tongue of fire, and in its left it held a whip of many thongs. Aye, aye, wailed Legolas. A Balrog is come. Gimli stared with wide eyes. Durin's bane, he cried, and letting his axe fall, he covered his face. A Balrog, muttered Gandalf. Now I understand. He faltered and leaned heavily on his staff. What an evil fortune, and I am already weary. So that's the moment that they realize that this is actually a Balrog. I like the way that they speak about his streaming mane kindled and blazed behind it. So you're like, he had a mane basically on fire, which is really cool little description there.
That's cool.
Then we get the quote a little bit down where Gandalf tells them, this foe is beyond any of you and fly and all that kind of stuff. But I want to keep going down, and it says here that the Balrog reached the bridge, and keep going down. His enemy halted again, facing him, and the shadow about it reached out like two vast wings. It raised the whip, and the thongs whined and cracked. Fire came from its nostrils. You cannot pass, he said. The orc stood still, and a dead silence fell. I am a servant of the secret fire, wielder of the flame of Anor. You cannot pass. The dark fire will not avail you. Flame of Udun. Go back to the shadow. You cannot pass. The Balrog made no answer. The fire in it seemed to die, but the darkness grew. It stepped forward slowly onto the bridge, and suddenly it drew itself up to a great height, and its wings were spread from wall to wall. So, that's the main part.
Okay, so if anyone was to, first of all, taking it out of context, if you were just to say its wings spread out, touching wall to wall,
from wall to wall,
spreading from wall to wall. Yeah, so if you're just taking that sentence, you're like, well, there's a description right there. It has wings, but you have to look at what he said earlier. He said its shadow stretched like wings or something.
Exactly.
Like that.
So if I go back, just what I read there, there were two
just
parts.
Going off that same description.
That's exactly it. So in the first part, it says the shadow about it reached out like two vast wings. So the shadow was around it, and it was like two wings. So he's clearly using like a metaphor there, or a simile, where he's saying it was like this. And then later on, he says, but its wings were spread from wall to wall. And that's within the same descriptive paragraph there, where he's talking about the shadow was around it like wings,
shadow around it.
And the wings were spread from wall to wall. So there, I mean, I've read that the first couple of times I read that, I think I was like, definitely has wings. Maybe they were hidden a bit in the shadow, but they were there. Its wings were spread from wall to wall. But I think the more I read it, I would say it's probably more that it's actually a metaphor. And I actually have to shout out Matt from Nerd of the Rings, because I was watching a video of his speaking about this exact subject, and he spoke about that and saying the way that Tolkien was writing, the way that Tolkien used to always write, very often he would use similar styles of writing where he would create a simile, he would create a kind of an idea, like the Balrog, the smoke was like wings, and then later he would just say his wings. And like, I'm going to give you an example now. And he would basically say later on, he would take the example or the simile that he's given before, and then he would speak about that in a moment to make it seem like that was actually a real thing. But it's just, he's making that descriptive kind of simile almost feel even more real. But it's just, that's his style of writing. So I'm going to read a little quote here that Tolkien has where he speaks about just before the fall of Numenor, where people would look out across the waters and they would see these they would see these clouds in the sky. So reading here this quote, it is, "And out of the west there would be at times a great cloud in the evening, shaped as it were an eagle, with pinions spread to the north and the south, and slowly it would loom up, blotting out the sunset, and then uttermost night would fall upon Numenor. And some of the eagles bore lightning beneath their wings, and thunder echoed between sea and cloud." So there, he starts by saying that the cloud was shaped as if it were an eagle. And then later he said, some of the eagles bore lightning beneath their wings. So there, clearly we're not supposed to believe that the cloud has just transformed into an eagle and this eagle has lightning beneath his wings. It's saying that, it looks like an eagle. And then later he's saying the eagle now has lightning beneath his wings. So he's using the eagle. He's basically stating it is an eagle after having told us that it was not. So it seems like that's probably what's happening here as well. That he says that the smoke rose up like a cloud. Like a cloud. The smoke rose up like wings. And then later on, he's saying his wings stretched from wall to wall. So it seems from that now that I would say it should be fairly definitive that he does not, in fact, have wings, unfortunately. Although, unfortunately, I'm saying because they look absolute badass.
Like it's one of those things. Like I truly believe that with that comparison there with the eagles and the clouds, I do think that Tolkien didn't mean for the Balrogs to have wings, but it's just one of those things that it's so ingrained in us now that it's not an issue because there's no real contradiction. It's just like, oh well, actually, if you really digest it, he's just making a simile or he's making a metaphor. So I think if anyone is watching the movies and then going and reading the books for the first time and they never heard of this whole debate, they would just skim over that passage, wouldn't even take notice of the word like, and just be like, oh yeah, and here he's talking about the wings. And that's fine. It's fine for both ways are fine. There's no real contradictions. It's just what people imagine.
No,
I don't
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say I don't think that. I'm positive that Peter Jackson, he wasn't stupid. It's not like he just skimmed over that. And I think him and John Howe together came up with this design, and they probably just said like, which looks cooler. Like we can get away with this by giving it wings because Tolkien almost says that it definitely has wings. But like you lovely or read out so lovely there. I don't think that is the case. But
yeah,
who cares?
Who cares? And again, I mean, for me,
it's fun to talk about.
It is fun to talk about. For me, this is like only very recently I've started being like, yeah, okay, I can kind of accept that they don't have wings, because for a good while I was just sort of, hold on to the fact that I kind of enjoyed defending it, even though I knew I kind of didn't really have a leg to stand on. But I was like, look, you can't exactly 100% definitively say that they don't. And I was just like, I love the design of Balrogs with wings. I just think it looks so cool. I've seen some very few fan art drawings of Balrogs without wings that I've been like, oh, that looks class as well. Most of the time, whenever I see fan art and it's with wings, I'm always like, that just looks way better. It's just cooler.
Yeah.
So
and a lot of the time it is in the same kind of demonic kind of dragon shape, even if it doesn't have the wings. And nearly every single time you see that kind of art without wings, it's surrounded in shadow anyways, and that makes it look cool.
In flame and shadow.
Breathe in flame. Yeah. It's actually funny today while I was driving into town, I was thinking about Lord of the Rings, of course, and I was thinking about, it's amazing how there's so few things that we argue about with Peter Jackson's movies. Like you've got the do the Balrogs actually have wings? You've got like, lack of Tom Bombadil. You've got a couple of things, but like, how good are those movies that there's, he covers 3 huge books and all the lore of Tolkien, and there's such few things that we can nitpick. And even those things that you nitpick were issues beforehand anyways. Whereas now, like, you could put out a trailer for The Rings of Power or another TV show or anything, and you can nitpick it to death and be like, well, this is different. They've changed this. They don't have the rights to this and blah, blah, blah. But it just seems like what Peter Jackson had was like perfect. And it still is perfect.
Still is to this day.
To this day.
So there you are now. And that was...
there you have it.
Just going to put my Fellowship with the Ring bookmark back in there. Put that away. So, moving on, I want to just look at a little bit of trivia for you, Dave. Things that did you know? So, first of all, did you know that the Balrogs would serve as the inspiration for the race of demons in Dungeons and Dragons, and Pathfinder known as Balors, who, like Balrogs, are large, powerful demons with red skin, large bat wings, a powerful flame sword, and a whip? Did you know?
Right.
There you
I think I did hear that before. Is that I know in Stranger Things they have the Demigorgon or something. Isn't that?
I don't know if that's
like
got anything to do with it, but possibly.
Well, I know like they have a little figurine in that, and I think it looks similar to a Balrog, where it might be demonic wings with a sword or something, and that's just what they end up naming the like bad guy in Stranger Things.
Oh,
like,
you mean when they're playing
Dungeons and Dragons, yeah. And then they have the Demigorgon or Demi something. And I think that's what they call the bad guy as well. And I think I did look up before ages ago for an episode where we talked about like inspirations of Lord of the Rings and how Dungeons and Dragons is so heavily influenced by Lord of the Rings. Not only with Balrogs.
No, loads of stuff.
Yeah, there's like they've got like literally words that are taken right out of Lord of the Rings, not hobbits, but I think they have like something very close, like habits or something, and then they've got like instead of ents, they've got something very close as well, and obviously wood elves and dwarves and all that kind of stuff. But very heavily influenced.
The sneaky snakes. Yeah. So that's one bit of trivia. I have another couple of things that are interesting as well, which is that in the cancelled Lord of the Rings video game entitled Lord of the Rings: The White Council, there were apparently going to be ice Balrogs, and the game makers got approval to make this change to the lore. However, because the game was cancelled, these ice Balrogs never appeared.
Bummer. So, that would have been cool. And I've also heard things about that game before, and that
I know
could have been class.
Yeah, I wish. I mean, you never know. Somebody could come in and save the day and swoop in and give loads of money and say, "Here,
Amazon
game." And then the last bit of trivia that I want to give is that the Balrog's name served as inspiration for the Street Fighter villain, who is also called Balrog. So there you go.
Is that the Street Fighter? Is that a game? Is it?
Yeah,
Street Fighter. Yeah, that's the game.
And
there's a guy in it called Balrog.
Definitely a couple of movies. Yeah, that were not very good movies that were made in like the 90s, but
it's like Tekken style.
Kind of like Tekken.
Yeah. And there's a guy in it called Balrog.
So there you go. So
did you remember that?
I did not remember that. No, I was more of a Tekken man than I played Street Fighter as a kid, but it's been a long time. I was never one of the guys that got like massively into it. But I didn't know that. So there you go. If any Street Fighter fans out there, get in touch. Let us know if you beat the Balrog. So we're nearly there, but I have a couple of other questions for you, Dave, which is, do you think that the Balrog could shapeshift? Like, for example, Sauron or other Maiar?
I don't know about shapeshift. Well, like if I'm sure you're going to give me some kind of cool example now, but I wouldn't have thought about it that way. But I would have thought about they could probably manipulate their size, one of their powers is they're able to just pull a flaming sword and a flaming whip out of nowhere. So they're clearly able to manipulate atoms and turn them into things and create stuff out of nothing. So maybe could they shapeshift?
Shapeshift?
Let's ship. Could they? I don't know.
Well, I mean, it's a hard question to answer, but I was looking into this and I found an answer online, and I found this on a forum and I don't remember where, so I apologize if I don't remember where. I can't remember this. I just copied something here and I don't remember exactly where I got it, so my apologies, but I'm going to read this out, which is that the Ainur, which is basically the Maiar, are part of the Ainur, they don't have physical bodies. They have to create a physical form called Fana using their innate power. This allows them to interact with the world and with the children of Iluvatar. The Ainur usually don't keep these bodies permanently. They discard them and assume other forms at will. Keeping one form for a long time and committing certain acts makes the Ainu dependent on the body. Melian took the form of an elven woman and fell in love with Thingol, and she ruled Doriath with him and gave birth to his child. This bound her to her body. Morgoth ruled as a tyrant and expended much of his power in various acts of evil, and he lost the ability to shed his form. Sauron also committed various acts of evil, but doesn't seem to suffer from this problem to such a severe degree, and much is made of his immense talent for shapeshifting and assuming a deceptively pleasing form. It was only after he died in the downfall of Númenor that he lost this skill, and then was reduced to assuming the form of a terrifying large humanoid shape to play the role of the Dark Lord. With the Balrogs, we know that they assumed terrible demonic shapes at the beginning of their time in Arda. They were subverted by Morgoth and had a specific role to play as his enforcers, inspiring fear in his enemies and smiting them with shadow and fire. They would have stayed in those forms for the entirety of the First Age. There would be no reason for them to take on any other form. They never seem to do anything that requires any sort of subtlety. That is Sauron's talent, not theirs. They seem rather single-minded. Thousands of years in such a form would probably have had the same side effect on them as it did on Morgoth. They are almost certainly now trapped in such a shape. Durin's Bane ran away from the downfall of his master and of Angband and hid in Moria. It could have taken on a better shape that would allow it to hide better or deceive others, but it did not. It simply went to sleep until the dwarves awoke it, and then it went on a rampage. Centuries later, Legolas was able to figure out what the monster in Moria was pretty quickly, even though he almost certainly had never seen one before, but must have heard in stories the descriptions from the First Age. So we can make an educated guess that no, the Balrog cannot change shape. So, there you are.
Yeah.
A nice long drawn out answer. But I think that's kind of cool, the way that it's saying, like, especially that last part where it's saying how Durin's Bane, at the end of the First Age, he fled and kind of hid himself for thousands of years. And if he wanted, he could have been like, oh, I'll just shapeshift into a different form and people won't recognize me. Because at that point, it was probably dangerous times for Balrogs. Everything else was trying to kill him.
He was retired, like.
Yeah, he was out of his zone. And so, yeah.
No, that is cool that it picks out the point that Legolas recognized what this creature was, and the only way he could would be through stories of descriptions, because he never saw any.
In the quote that I just read a few moments ago, where it says, it gives a description of what he is, and then it says, I wailed Legolas, a Balrog is come. He's the first to say it. And then Gimli says Durin's Bane, and he basically probably knew the stories of Durin's Bane as well from his dwarven kin. So it was Legolas who recognized him first as that being a Balrog. So obviously he had heard descriptions of what they looked like. Obviously the whole fire and smoke kind of gave it away. But yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
So something kind of
cool.
interesting as well for that as well. And yeah, that kind of brings us to the end of this week's episode. So any other things about the Balrog, Dave, that you'd like to get off your chest?
No, we talked about it in a great manner. I just want to say that I really hope that in the Rings of Power that he doesn't awake up in season 2 and start doing his bidding then, because that should be in the Third Age. And let's see. But I'm looking forward to seeing more of Durin's Bane in the second season, because all we saw of him was everything we got to see in the trailer. So disappointment. So
bit of a letdown.
I'm looking forward to seeing what he will do and what other Balrogs might do in other flashbacks. So
sure, exactly. No, I agree completely.
I am the servant of the secret fire, wielder of the flame of Arnor. The dark fire will not avail you, flame of Udun! You shall not pass!
Well, guys, that'll just about do it for another episode of the Council of Elrond. We really hope you enjoyed this deep dive into the Balrog, and hopefully you've learned something interesting and had a couple of laughs along the way. So please get in touch and say hi and let us know your thoughts on this character. And you can do that by getting onto any of our socials in the description below. We have our link tree in there as well. You can also buy us a coffee there, or you can become a member of our Patreon. And that's really the best way to support us if you would like to do so. And you can also watch or listen to us anywhere you get your podcasts or on YouTube. And don't forget to please like and subscribe on there as well. Also, a big thank you to our current members of Patreon, and a huge shout out to Jack Knightley. So that's it for this week, guys. We'll see you Mellons next time.
Goodbye, Balrogs.